The amount of money that you are allowed to hold has absolutely nothing to do with how much you earn, and almost everything to do with how good and how worthy you feel to allow yourself to receive. And the way that we let love in and the way that we feel love being taken away from us, those same patterns show up in the way that they show up in our ability to hold money. We're going to go deep today in a topic that I think is going to perhaps be the one that's going to give you the biggest clue of all into helping to heal your relationship with money. And it's going to be the first of a little mini series on this podcast or YouTube channel that you're listening on. So stay tuned for some further deep dives around this subject. If we haven't met before, my name is Catherine Morgan. I'm a former qualified financial advisor, and these days I work in the field of money psychology. Now, by the end of this particular episode or video, you're going to understand exactly why money can feel really hard to hold on to at times. And we're going to look at this through the lens of three very specific ways that it mirrors how you give and how you receive love. And you might be wondering, what's the link? Well, this is what we're going to be navigating today. And I'm going to leave you with some small, gentle practices as well to begin healing your relationship with money. Can I just ask a huge favor though? Wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on the YouTube channel or on my podcast, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps us to get this content to more people, especially in the AI-driven world. There's so much content on the online space right now. And it also makes sure that you don't miss any of the future episodes. So let's get to it. Let me just start with a very brief story. And if you've been in our community for a while, or you've been listening to the show for a while, you might remember this from an early episode. And I'll drop a link in the show notes or underneath the podcast to this earlier episode where I talked about a particular live example of where this relationship between love and money really played out. And I also share some information about why I found it particularly difficult to hold on to money. Now, a few years ago, I was really lucky enough to be invited to Necker Island. I've had the privilege of being over to this beautiful island twice. And on this particular visit, one evening, one of the women who was there was renewing her wedding vows. And it was absolutely breathtaking. There was candlelight, there was champagne, there was lots of dancing on the tabletops, like the sea was all around us. It was just beautiful. And we were all celebrating her and her partner. And the very next morning, as we walked up to the great house on the islands, she was sitting there on the couch with her arm in a sling. And she'd actually gone to bed that night. She'd slipped on the floor as she was getting into bed, and she had broken it. And hours after one of the happiest evenings of her life. Now, she speaks very openly about how hard she has found it across her whole life to let things stay and allow love to stay and to be loved without some part of her waiting for the thing that comes along and takes it away. And I've watched that exact pattern play out in so many of the women that I have supported in our communities. And it might show up where an award arrives, or a big launch happens, or a pay rise comes through, or money is inherited, and then something goes wrong almost immediately. And this is why love and money are so intertwined together. The capacity to hold one tends to be the capacity to hold the other. And just take a moment to notice where you might have experienced this in your own life. And before we get into the three specific ways, let me just explain a little bit more here. So the deepest connection between love and money is that two our bodies, our nervous system, they represent the very same thing: safety, security, and that felt sense of being held, of having enough, of being worthy, of being okay. So here is something that I would just love for you to sit with just for a moment. We all came into this world whole, worthy. We didn't have to prove in any way. We didn't have to earn our place for worthiness. We didn't have to prove ourselves in any way. Or we didn't even have to do anything for worthiness or be useful in order to be loved. We were just worthy. And that worthiness belonged to you. And then life happens, through conditioning, through programming. We literally became these sponges, or we absorbed everything, all the way from influences around our families, our school experiences, from the wider societal systems that we live in. And so many of us picked up this concept unconsciously that love and support were conditional, that there were strings attached to that maybe had to be earned in some way and kept and deserved. And it's interesting because whenever I play the money game, which is a game that I do in my interactive financial well-being workshops, or if I'm doing a speaker engagement, I'll physically give cash away from stage. It's really fun. And very often when I give money to somebody in the audience and I ask them, how did it feel to receive? Very often, 9 times out of 10, the common response is, what are the strings attached? Like, what do I have to do in order to keep that money? Right? There's a condition that has been attached to that receiving, to that worthiness. Well, am I even worthy enough to take that money that you've just given me? I haven't had to do anything for it. And to make sense of all of this conditioning and all of these things that are going on, we end up building masks, or we end up carrying these beliefs about ourselves that actually take us further and further away from this innate feeling and knowing that we are just worthy human beings. We are born worthy. And it's interesting, isn't it? Even if you just observe patterns in very young children, it isn't until they become conditioned that you start to see change. And notice that none of this is your fault. Like, none of this is something that you've done wrong. It's that these are just borrowed beliefs. They've literally been handed down to you even before you were born. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. And what became a conditional response with love so often becomes conditional with money as well. And so the sense that you have to earn your enoughness, the sense that that security has to be chased, or that it can just be whipped away and taken away at any moment. And this is why we're talking about love and money on the podcast or on the YouTube channel over the next couple of weeks. And as you start to really unfold this topic, where discovering where you may have detached your sense of worthiness, your relationship with money really begins to just soften a little bit. And you'll understand more about this when we talk about these 3 patterns. So the first way that money mirrors love is in how you receive. So what do I actually mean by that? So your capacity to receive is simply how much good you can let in and let stay before it starts to feel really uncomfortable. How much love, how much praise, how much help, how much money you can hold before some part of you wants to give it back, hand it back, brush it off, give it to somebody else, or shrink yourself down. And some of us have a very wide capacity. A compliment, a gift, an unexpected bit of money comes in, and we simply enjoy it. And some of us, and I include myself in this for a long, long time, had a very narrow one. So the good thing arrives, and then almost straight away, we find a way to move it back out. And there's a little experiment that you can run this week, maybe even today, to just sense where your capacity might sit within that scale. So I want you to notice this week, when someone gives you a compliment, notice what you do with it. If somebody says, your hair looks lovely, and you hear yourself say, it needs a cut. Actually, I haven't washed it for 7 days. Or that's a beautiful dress. And you say, this old thing, I've had it 7 years. It was actually a charity shop find. Or this is where you can go buy it. Notice the push. Notice how quickly the good thing, the compliment, gets deflected before it even has the chance to stay with you. And that very same reflex, that reflex is at work all the time with money. And research into where we feel emotion in the body has suggested that feelings like safety and warmth, they show up as a physical sensation, not just a thought in our minds, that we respond to them in some way. And see if you can notice that when you receive that compliment. Is there this tightening, I know for sure, the last time I got a compliment, I instantly feel this almost like my whole body contracts, and I feel it in my shoulders. I feel it in my chest, everything just shrinks. It just narrows. And so when money arrives and your capacity to receive is narrow, the body can read it as something that's actually it's threatening in some way. It feels closer to threat. So we shrink ourselves down. We want to go hide. And then that behavior displays itself in the way that we feel we have to move money out. And it might be an impulsive buy, a bill that suddenly appears from nowhere. It might be that you have to go and invest that with a mentor, or it has to go somewhere else other than sitting in your bank accounts. And what's really interesting, and I trained as an inherited family trauma specialist a few years ago, and a lot of this pattern usually traces back to your very earliest experiences of being loved and being cared for. How safely you were able to receive love when you were very small can become almost like a blueprint, a template for how you let good things in now. And these can be borrowed beliefs. They can be formed long before you even had a say in them. And there's no blame here. I know that for many people, they may not know that they're mothers. They may have been adopted. There may have been some difficult situations growing up. And so none of this is coming from a place of blame. It's just awareness. And for many of us, we are also sitting in this much wider layer that sits underneath it, where we've got generations of being, we've been kept at arm's length away from money and away from wealth. That's not for us. That's for men. That's for somebody else. And so our bodies, our nervous systems never actually really had the chance to practice holding it generationally. And if you think about the concept of women having wealth, women would be shunned, women would be silenced, women would be told that, well, that isn't yours to keep. And so there's a lot going in our generational blueprint as well. So this week, I want you to notice how long you can let one thing stay before you have to undo it in some way. And a compliment is a really great place to start. And just noticing it on its own is where your capacity will then begin to expand. So before we move on to the second one, the second way, if you're finding this conversation super interesting and you want a community to go alongside these conversations, I'm really excited to announce that we have decided to bring back the Money Circle. And if you've been following me for some years now, the Money Circle used to be a paid membership that we ran at the very start of my journey. And we decided to bring it back as a free community where we come together and dive deeper into some of these conversations. And we talk about themes every single month. This month, we're going to be talking about money and the nervous system. Next month, we're going to be talking about love and money. And so if these conversations are something you want to be part of, and you want to be part of a really beautiful community where we hold these conversations and we hold space to honor and acknowledge these rich conversations, then come over and join us. I'll pop a link in the show notes, or a link on my screen right now if you're watching this on video. And we're also going to be building out some resources as well, which might be prompts, they might be tools, things that are going to help you to deepen these experiences and these conversations. So the link is in the show notes or on your screen right now. So let's talk about the second way that love and money show up together. And the second way is how you give. And for many of us, we learned that love has to be earned, that we were safe when we were useful in some way. And it's interesting when you think about, I'm watching Little House on the Prairie right now on Netflix, and it's so interesting looking at some of the generational patterns that existed where you had to be giving some kind of value back to the community. You had to either own land or have a title or be contributing to society in order to feel valued. And by feeling valued, we felt loved. And that created safety, that we were safe when we were useful. So if we're the ones giving or sorting or rescuing, any of those things, then we were then useful. And so what ends up happening today is that we give and we give and we give in relationships and with money, because giving actually feels much safer than receiving does. And so if you've ever picked up a bill and felt like you couldn't afford to pay it, or you've over-delivered for a client who was actually already really satisfied with the service and the work that you've been providing them, or you've maybe been like funding everyone else around you, your team, mentors, while actually you yourself have been restricted somehow with money, not being able to pay yourself, notice the feeling that sits underneath it. Because for a lot of women, it isn't generosity, it's safety. And overgiving becomes this way of staying worthy of love without ever having to receive. Oh, that might have hit home a little bit for some of you. And even in my own work, I sometimes feel this myself. Like I am just as susceptible to these patterns as you are. And this is one of the reasons why we created the money story types. And the enabler is one of the money story type patterns where we really often see this sense of worthiness that is being bound up in giving to other people. And if you haven't taken our money story types quiz yet, join the newsletter link on the screen or in the show notes, and you'll get access to complete this little money story types assessment and get a personalized report to support you in this journey. When your value is anchored in what you give, then holding money for yourself can feel selfish, it can feel unsafe, it can just feel wrong. So before we go on, just take a moment to think about which of these three things are you? Are you the one who struggles to receive? Are you the one who braces that it might be taken away? Let me know in the comments if you're listening to this. And the shift comes right here. Giving and receiving are meant to move in equal measure. So just this week, practice receiving something really small without giving anything back. Let someone help you. Take the compliment and just say, thank you. Notice what your body does when there's nothing to repay. And the third way is how you feel for money or love to be taken away. Now, that sounds really dramatic and like, well, who would like for it to be taken away, right? But this is the one that actually keeps us from holding. So when I was in my 20s and I was in £30,000 worth of debt I was a financial advisor at the time, right? You can imagine the shame that I experienced being in that amount of debt. And my capacity to hold money was at around about £100. If I had more than £100 in my account, my body felt unsafe and I would find a way to move it out. It made no logical sense. It wasn't a logical problem. It was a lived, felt problem. And we each have this internal setting, like a thermostat, this like financial comfort zone that we teach to our financial coaches. And so whenever we go above it, whether it's in savings or investments or your business revenue or your salary, your body will perceive that as expansion, danger. And so it braces, it finds a way to bring it back down to what is familiar because the brain loves familiarity. And this is why so many entrepreneurs describe a really, really great month followed by a really, really expensive one, or a pay rise suddenly followed by a problem. And it can look like self-sabotage on the surface, but actually it is closer to a safety system that is just doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so what you make money mean really matters here. If somewhere along your journey, your experiences with money, you learned that having too much meant losing people, carrying responsibility that you didn't actually ask for, or becoming almost like attention was brought to you that you didn't want, then part of you will just move away from it. And it makes sense. And I know that when I began to heal my own relationship with money, something really changed with my relationship with love and vice versa. When I started to practice holding and receiving, and I started with compliments, receiving compliments, holding that love, dropping into my body, bringing in those experiences and those positive feelings, and then holding that for as long as I could. As my capacity started to expand, I could hold more money without having to find a way to let it go. And that even included things like boundaries. I could hold a boundary. I could start saying no to people when I was just saying yes to everything. I could ask for help when I needed it and allow that help to come in without any strings attached. So notice your capacity to hold love and the capacity to hold money. And notice that these two things will grow together. I can promise you. So you might be wondering at this point, well, where does all of this actually come from? And what is really interesting is that so much of this reaches back further, much further than you probably realize. And I'll give you an example of this. I worked with a 43-year-old woman last year, and she actually sold a lot of her assets to open up a retreat center. And she had this beautiful vision of what she was creating. And for various reasons, it just didn't go the way that she had hoped it would. And she lost actually the whole retreat center. And for obvious reasons, she, really felt that experience, and she was in a very low point in her life when she reached out to work with me. And as we started to kind of look back through patterns, we started to look back through her family. And what was interesting is that her father in his early 40s had made a business decision that went badly. He lost the family money and he went bankrupt. And his father, also in his early 40s, had been deceived out of his life savings by another man. And he never recovered from it. And he actually, unfortunately, took his own life. 3 generations at the same age, the same experience of loss. And it's a lot more common than you might think. this pattern recognition through intergenerational family experiences actually emerges a lot in epigenetics research as well. And a lot of the epigenetics research suggests that the trauma that our parents or our grandparents live through leaves this kind of imprint, and that some of the effects can actually be carried down to us, even through changes in the way that our genes are expressed. So we're not, it seems, born with a completely clean slate. It's a little more like arriving with an operating system that's already been preloaded with experiences. And so we can carry these fears, these feelings, and these braces for impact that actually were never ours to begin with. And there's a fascinating book that you can read on this subject that's written by Mark Woolin, and it's called It Didn't Start With You. It's a really fascinating area to explore. And there's something quite oddly comforting in this, that some of what we have carried around money isn't ours to carry. And then there's the earliest relationship of all of these things. And so much of how we learn to receive is shaped from those very first bonds that we have with our caregivers. And mostly actually often with our mothers, and how safely we were able to take in her love becomes this template, this blueprint for how we let love and how we allow abundance in. And when that early attention is warm and steady and fruitful, then as a child, as a baby, we tend to feel this sense of being held, of feeling secure, of feeling safe. And when it's been disrupted in any way, then that's no one's fault necessarily. It's often because our mothers may have been carrying her own pain and her own depression, her own inherited load. And a child can be left feeling not quite met in some way. And obviously at that age, we don't just decide that something is wrong. And we don't decide that something is wrong with the situation. We decide that something is wrong with ourselves. And so I just want to hold some like real compassionate space for this conversation, because it is deep and it can be a little heavy at times, but it's often so beautiful to sense this awareness for ourselves. When I trained as an inherited family trauma practitioner, there are a couple of things that we were shown to experience and develop when looking at these patterns. One of them was through word recognition and patterns, which I love to dive into, and I will dive deeper into some of these subjects on the future episodes. And one of them was looking at how we actually entered the world through our birth experiences. And if your own arrival into the world was difficult in some way, maybe your mother had a hard labor, it may have been where your family were already under a lot of financial stress or strain, that actually what settles in our bodies as babies can become these beliefs that expansion or safety is somehow not familiar. And anything that's not familiar is dangerous. And so if something good happens, something bad follows closely behind. And so we brace, we wait, and sometimes we undo our own success before it can be taken away from us. And none of this is coming from a place of blame, not of yourself, not of your mothers, not of any of these experiences. It was simply a trauma that got in the way of love. And understanding that is the first step. And very often this is, if you had early experiences of trauma at birth or experiences where love was not available, then these are subject areas that I really believe a lot of us should go and get professional therapy, go and get somatic therapy to really understand how we might be carrying and holding some of these patterns. Some of these things can be very simply shifted, but a lot of them go so much deeper. So do be kind to yourself as you're listening to this. And what we do with all of this information is how we can begin to heal it. And what the research on the brain has suggested, and I think you'll find this genuinely hopeful, is that we don't heal these patterns by thinking our way out of them. We heal by understanding them and by having new positive experiences, and then allowing ourselves to truly feel them again and again and again until these new pathways begin to form. So we can't change the past. We can't change family genetics. But each time we allow ourselves to feel something good and safe, we stimulate the brain's calming and reward chemistry. So things like dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. And then over time, research has suggested that this feeds the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and it helps us to settle the more reactive alarm part, what we call the limbic system. So in other words, we are slowly and gently teaching the body that good things can be safe. So what are these positive experiences? Well, they are gentler than you might think, and practicing receiving comfort and support, holding moments of compassion, feelings of gratitude, feelings of love and kindness, practicing mindfulness, anything at all that allows you to feel peace or joy. And the way that you build this pathway is simply to take these in on purpose and then allow them to linger a few seconds longer than you normally would. That lingering is the practice. That's where the expansion comes in. And that is how we begin to heal our relationship with love and money. And one practical step that you can also take this week, think about this love and money connection. Go and open up a savings account and play this little game, gentle game with holding that money. £5 more this week than last week, a little more the month after. The amount actually doesn't really matter. It's what you're doing. It is allowing your body to rehearse the feeling of holding on to something good and building an anchor point for safety. And you might pair it with a little weekly ritual, a money check-in, where you simply notice how your body feels when you look at the balance. No judgment, just noticing. And this really is nervous system work, and it's the foundations of underneath every practical money decision that you will ever make. So remember, the relationship you have with money is a mirror reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. And so if this landed for you, then please save this episode, subscribe on the channel so you don't miss next week's episode in the Love and Money series. Much love to all of you, and I'll see you again on the show next Monday.